fine feeling to put your hand in your pocket and shake together 10 or 15 of them. Not that it will ever happen to anybody again, in my time anyway. But I wonder, did the last man, the very last man who had a pocketful of them, stop to think that he was the last man to be able to jingle sovereigns? There is a record for you. It is nothing to fly at hundreds of miles an hour, for indeed I think there is something to laugh about when a fuss is made of such nonsense. But only let me see a man with a pocketful of sovereigns to spend. And yet everybody had them here once. When the men finished working on Saturday dinner time, my mother would hear the whistle and run to put the old stool outside the front door to wait for my father and my brothers coming up the hill. I have often stood outside the door looking down the valley, seeing in my mind all the men coming up black with dust and laughing in groups, walking bent-backed, because the street is steep, and in those days it was not cobbled. The houses, of course, are the same now as they were then, made of stone from the quarries. There is a job they must have had, carting all those blocks all those miles in carts and wains, and not one road that you could call really good, because the land was all farms then. All the women used to dress up specially in their second best, with starched stiff aprons on a Saturday morning, for then the men were paid when they came off the midday shift. As soon as the whistle went, they put chairs outside their front doors and sat there waiting till the men came up the hill and home. Then, as the men came up to their front doors, they threw their wages, sovereign by sovereign, into the shining laps, fathers first and sons or lodgers in a line behind. My mother often had 40 of them, with my father and 5 brothers working. And up and down the street you would hear them singing and laughing, and in among it all the pelting jingle of gold. A good day was Saturday then, indeed. My father and my brothers used to go out in the back to the shed to bathe in summer, but in winter they came into the kitchen. My mother filled the casks with hot water and left wooden buckets full of hot and cold for sluicing. When they had finished and put on their best clothes, they came in the kitchen for the Saturday dinner, which was always special. Sunday, of course, there was no cooking allowed, unless my father was going down to the pit to see into some matter or other, and even then my mother was very careful. But Saturday was always good with us. Even I can remember that, but only when I was small, mind. We always had hams in the kitchen to start with, all the year round, and not just one ham, but a dozen at a time. 2 whole pigs hanging up in one kitchen, ready to be sliced for anybody who walked through the door, known or stranger. We had a henhouse for years in the backyard here. Fine white and brown hens, and you should have seen the eggs they laid. Brown and dark speckly brown, and some almost pink, and all as big as your fist. I can just remember going out and crawling in the straw to the nests while the hen was shouting and flapping her old wings at me, and laying hold of one, very warm, and so big for my little hands that I had to hold it to my chest to carry it back to Mamma in the kitchen. Hens have got a funny smell with them, one that comes, I think, from their feathers, just as a man will have his own smell about him. That smell of hens is one of the homeliest smells it is possible to put your nose to. It makes you think of so much that was good that has gone. But when we used to sit down to dinner on Saturday, it was lovely to look at the table. Mind, in those days nobody thought of looking at the table to keep the memory of it living in their minds. There was always a baron of beef and a shoulder or leg of lamb on the dishes by my father. In front of him were the chickens, either boiled or roast, or ducks or turkey or goose, whatever was the time of the year. And then potatoes, mashed, boiled and roast, and cabbage and cauliflower, or peas or beans, and sometimes, when the weather was good, all of them together. We used to start with Grace, all standing up, and Mamma holding me in the crook of her arm. My father used to close his eyes tight and look up at the stain on the ceiling, holding his hands out across the table. Sometimes, when he opened his eyes, he would catch me looking at him, and shake his fist at me, and say I would come to a bad end. In play, of course. Then Mamma would tell him to go on with him, and leave me alone. But indeed, so far my poor old father has been so right, I have long thought he must have been a prophet. When we sat down, with me in Mamma's lap, my father would ladle out of the cauldron thin leek soup, with a big lump of ham in it that showed its rind as it turned over.